All right, everybody. It is 2 o'clock here, according to my clock in North Carolina. So we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to the State of Readers Advisory webinar. We are so happy you're here. Before we dive in, I want to go over just a few reminders for you. First, we have a very lively chat going on already. I would encourage you to continue chatting in with to interact with your fellow participants and the presenters and the attendees of this webinar. We will have time for a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, please add them to the chat and we will be keeping an eye on that. So we want to be sure to capture any questions that you have. Also, we would love, this whole webinar is about what's going on with Readers Advisory today. So please feel free to share your experiences. We have some questions that our panelists will be answering. We'd love to hear what your experiences are as well. If you're posting about the webinar on social media, we ask that you use the hashtag NoveList conversations so that other people can follow along and share the conversation. Last, if you're having any technical problems with Zoom, there is a chat option to talk with a support person on the launch screen of Zoom, and they should be able to help you. So let's go ahead and get started. We, as I said, are going to be talking about what Readers Advisory looks like today, especially how COVID has impacted Readers Advisory, both in the last year and a half and how it continues to impact it. But before we get started, I do want to introduce all of our panelists. We have Danielle Baraski, who is the Vice President of NoveList, where she leads a team that creates solutions for connecting readers, books, and libraries. Prior to her current role, she was the Director of Sales and Marketing for NoveList. And before that, she worked in several different kinds of libraries. So she has lots of experience in lots of different types of library work. Amy Dittmeyer is a librarian at the Blue Island Public Library, where they enjoy finding the perfect book or movie for the community of her library. Amy has contributed articles to Library Journal and is a regular reviewer for Booklist and Shelf Awareness. Michelle Morris is a collection development librarian at Fort Worth Public Library. Her role is to select books in English and Spanish, analyze the collections, and provide Readers Advisory assistance to staff. She is currently on the Library Reads Board of Directors. Carolina Saldivar is a bilingual librarian at the Hadley branch of the Denver Public Library and is originally from Mexico. She provides a broad range of library services, including reference and Readers Advisory services in Spanish. Carolina is currently working with other librarians across her system on a Spanish picture book core collections project. Barry Trott is a Special Projects and Technical Services Director at the Williamsburg Regional Library in Virginia, where he coordinates the library's communications and marketing, statistical analysis, digital collections, services, and programs, including the library website and acquisitions and cataloging. Barry is past president of the American Library Association's Reference and User Services Association. Jessica Trotter is an archivist by training, but now works as a collection development specialist for the Capital Area District Libraries in Lansing, Michigan. Digital selector for the Midwest Collaborative for Library Services Overdrive Consortium, serves on the board for Library Reads and advocates for thoughtful and inclusive Readers Advisory. And I'm Hallie Eisenman. I lead the content team at NoveList, which oversees the creation of the lists, articles, next reads, newsletters, and all the other amazing and informative content you can find in NoveList. And I'll be your moderator today. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to talk a bit about the survey that we did on the State of Readers Advisory, why we did it, how we did it, who participated, and Danielle Baraski is going to go over that for us. Danielle, can you give us an overview?
Sure. Thanks, Hallie.
Thank you.
I am delighted to be sharing information about this survey today. My goal in the first few minutes of this webinar is to give you a quick overview of how the survey came to be and who answered it. And then after that, we'll dive into results and discussion with our wonderful panel. So first, I did want to acknowledge the great team of partners who collaborated on the survey. You can see them listed on screen here. So thank you to RUSA Codes, the Adult Reading Roundtable, Library Reads, and Library Journal. These organizations all came together to be sure that we were asking questions in the survey that would return valuable results for libraries. In our planning meetings, we spent time talking about what kinds of information would be helpful. For example, we talked about the fact that some of you might want to use this data when making a case for adding a new staff position or new service at your library. We imagined that it might be really helpful to say things like 75% of libraries are already offering form-based readers advisory, for example, and we think we should too. So our hope is that you find this data useful for your work in Readers Advisory. And thank you again to the partners who participated in helping us make this a very strong survey. Next slide. So let's dive in a little bit to why we did the survey. First of all, it's been years since we did the last one. I think it's about 8 years exactly. And a lot has changed since we did that last survey. We were very curious to see what has changed in public libraries. And of course, over the last year, some really specific things changed. We had a global pandemic, libraries closed and opened and closed, and we wanted to get a snapshot of how that had impacted Readers Advisory services. So that'll be a big part of the results that we're sharing. Another reason to do the survey was to gather benchmarks for the profession. As I mentioned before, it can be really helpful to understand what is standard practice in other libraries. And finally, we knew that the survey would be an opportunity to get some inspiration. There are some truly creative and innovative things being done in libraries around the country. And we just wanted an opportunity to celebrate the role that libraries play in growing readers and reading in their community. Next slide. And you can go one more. So next we'll provide a little context about who answered the survey questions. We did this survey in March of 2021. At that point in time, we were about a year into the pandemic, so can keep that in mind. We did limit it to public libraries only, and we limited the analysis to just the responses from the US and Canada. We had a total of 1,211 responses, which we think is absolutely terrific, kind of blew the previous survey's results out of the water, so that was really great. And we did have fantastic representation across all kinds of libraries. And so I will talk about that next. Next slide, please. So you can see in the chart on the left that we did have representation from all kinds of metro areas, from rural to urban. Suburban libraries or suburban areas were the biggest percentage at 62%. And then small town, rural, and urban areas all kind of hovered around 30%. And it's a similar story in the chart on the right. You can see that we had a fairly large percentage coming from the Midwest and the smallest percentage of respondents from the West. But in general, the overall takeaway here is that the results of the survey are broadly representative. The takeaways we're going to talk about today are a good reflection of the reality of what's happening in public libraries across the US and Canada. Next slide. In addition to the representation across regions, we also had a really good representation across different sizes of libraries. So you can see there's actually almost a pretty even spread across small, medium, and large size libraries. And what this says to me is that Readers Advisory is critical and important to all libraries, regardless of size. Next slide. We had a range of job roles represented in our respondents. Although there was one category that clearly stands out at the top. So adult public services librarians represented about 28% of the respondents. And that isn't much of a surprise. That group does quite a bit of Readers Advisory. But it's also good to know that we had other job titles represented as well, everything from managers to circulation assistants to children's services. So we heard from a lot of people in public libraries who were doing this work. Next slide. And this, I wanted to end on this. This will be my last point about the basics of the survey before we get to hearing from the panel. And I hope you find this statistic as wonderful as I do. We saw that 92% of respondents said that Readers Advisory is important or very important to their library. That's fantastic. This metric is an indication of the fact that the work we do is really central to the mission of public libraries. Connecting readers to books is important and valuable work. And I'm delighted that we have this data confirming our commitment to it. Since it is such a critical service, we want to be sure that we're offering the best possible service to our patrons. And that's what we're here to talk about today. How are libraries across the country serving their readers well? And now I will hand it back to Hallie so that we can get started on our conversation with the panel.
Thank you. Actually, before we do that, there was a question in chat that I'm hoping you can answer for us, Danielle. Somebody asked what the definition of small town was for that breakdown of the different kinds of areas. Do you remember?
That is a really good question. And I believe it actually is like it wasn't our definition. It was a standard like Census Bureau type of definition. I'd have to ask though, Library Journal actually conducted the survey and I'd have to ask them exactly what they used to determine it, but it's a good question. We'll see if we can get the exact answer.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, so let's go ahead and talk about library services in the time of COVID. Everybody's favorite topic, I know, is COVID. But the very first thing we have is a poll that we'd like to ask you. So there is a poll, it should pop up right in the middle of your screen as we launch it. And that is, what new services did you try at your library that you plan to keep doing, even once things go back to whatever normal looks like? What do you plan on doing? So we'll give everybody a few seconds here to answer that, and then we will share the results. If you're having any trouble seeing the poll pop up in Zoom, Jennifer has also put the question in chat and you can answer there as well. All right, we'll give it another. Personal shopper, I believe, is where a librarian would pick out books for an individual, where you might give your tastes or what you're interested in, and then somebody goes and puts books together for you. That would be my interpretation. Any other panelist is welcome to speak up if they have a different interpretation of that.
I think that's pretty accurate. This is Barry. I'll share in the chat a link to a form that we use for our personal shopper service.
Thank you. All right, why don't we go ahead and close out that poll? We can see what the results are. All right, so you can see curbside service and virtual programs take the top few spots. I don't think there's any surprise there. People pivoted very quickly into offering services when our patrons couldn't come into the building. So we do have obviously this wonderful panel of people. We want to hear about their experiences. Amy, I know you had some experiences with switching to new services that you tried during COVID. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, one thing that Blue Island did that I really, really liked is book talk videos. So these are things that we filmed ourselves, edited ourselves, and then posted ourselves on our social media, mostly our Facebook and our YouTube channel. And what I really liked about them, as opposed to some other kind of book talk videos that I've done, is that it was super conversational. We had them inside the library in our offices, and it was everyone from our IT person to the adult services librarians to the director. So it was a wide swath of people recommending books. And it was more of a conversation and less of a, I don't know, typical book talk that you might see at a book conference or something. But I love the idea of the book bundles too from the survey. I'd love to try that and integrate that into our services too.
Yeah, I love that book bundle. My local library actually did the book bundles, and I thought that was such a fun idea. And they're still doing it. Yeah. And we have lots of examples in chat. Anyone else on the panel want to share any services that your library did? Or that you're
we also did the book bundles and the grab and go, like DVD binge boxes, but also like the Facebook book club, because we had in-person book club, and so we moved to Facebook, and now it has over 600 members. And it's very much like, since it's asynchronous, if someone wants to post at 3 a.m., like, you know, like, oh, I just really finished this book, and what other people can respond. And since there's not that real-time thing, it really adds to that. But yeah, the other thing like the curbside pickup and virtual programs were also really popular. It's pretty common.
Thank you. Lots of good examples in chat too that people are sharing. Just a reminder, please mark it to go to everybody in chat, everyone, so that all the participants can see it, not just the panelists. All right, next slide, please. So these are some of the results. Oops, sorry, I just covered my whole screen. These are some of the results that came in from the survey that we wanted to share. As you can see, these reflect a lot of what you all just shared. yourselves in our poll. Personalized suggestions, virtual events like virtual book clubs, displays on the library website were popular, and in library displays, browsable collections, in-person book clubs were the most likely RA services to be put on hold due to COVID, which is no surprise either, as you would think with fewer people coming into the actual buildings. Although nearly 3/4 of libraries we're still creating in-library displays this past winter and browsable collections as well. So that's, you can see that things were starting to open back up potentially this winter. All right, next slide, please. And then as far as we asked people about adding or expanding services during COVID, you can see curbside being the big one. Over half of libraries added virtual programs as a new service last year. And then another 24% expanded whatever existed for their virtual programming. And then, as we were just saying, book bundles and grab and go bags were added by about half the libraries last year. So the survey results reflected what we're seeing here among the participants. So my next question is, were there services that you tried that didn't work, that maybe you launched expecting a good response and you didn't get it? And why do you think they weren't successful? Michelle, I think you have an example of this one.
We kind of had like a Friday bookshelf talk, which just kind of open-ended chat, and it was low attendance. And I also think because as the pandemic kind of wore on and there were more events on Fridays and other things, and so less people came. And so, yeah. So, once again, it was not, and there wasn't a clear focus. So that might have also been a factor, but that's one thing that didn't work out.
Anyone else have an example? Oh, somebody's saying in chat that a Facebook book group was not popular. Yeah, a lot of digital fatigue. I agree with that. I think that we are all big on Zoom and things at the beginning. And I think we all got a little tired as time wore on. All right, next slide, please. All right, so then, in the results that I just mentioned, there were things that people had to stop doing because of the switch to not having people in the buildings as much. So I'm curious if there are services that you're really excited to bring back that you had to stop during COVID, or if there are services that you stopped doing that now you've realized maybe don't necessarily need to come back. Maybe it's okay to leave them as they are for a while and just not have them come back. Michelle, I think you have an example here as well.
Yeah, once again, people really want the book clubs. Like there was like a Books and Brews, and people were calling like, when is that one starting again? And so like that. And so once again, people still really want to connect or meet people, but also I feel because they were feeling a little bit more socially isolated, that they really are interested in in-person programming coming back. We also slowly during the summer try to do like outdoor programming because obviously you can't have people inside, and there was like a nature walk and like people could draw and stuff like that. And there was also an outdoor music event, which is a little bit difficult in Texas because it's very hot. And so we're like slowly bringing that, but obviously it's a lot of conflict about what's the way forward now that the Delta variant is more prevalent.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think at least I was very hopeful that we were getting back more to normal. And then now with Delta, things maybe are taking a step backwards, but we all want to be safe. So for that second question, are there services you stopped doing that aren't coming back? Jessica, I think that when we were talking the other day, you had an example of something that's not coming back.
No, actually I didn't.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. It wasn't quite that. It was that
Okay.
I kind of feel like we don't know.
Oh,
because
right.
there's just so much going on still. But I'm kind of hoping that if nothing else, people are kind of really looking mindfully at what they bring back.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this sort of is giving us a chance to kind of look at what we were doing and maybe not overdo so quickly again.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of in the position of sort of wait and see still, because we really just kind of don't know what's going on yet. And I don't blame people for, I'm sorry. And I don't blame people for not rushing back. Sorry, go ahead, Danielle.
Yeah, no, I was just going to follow up. I think one of the questions in the survey was about tracking metrics when it comes to Readers Advisory.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure we had it on our agenda to talk about today, but this is a really good opening, I think, for something like that. Because how do you make those decisions? Do you have any data to kind of show which things were more effective, or even just what people are interested in? So I'm just curious if anybody's planning to do any surveys of patrons and ask them about things that they would like to see, make sure come back. Maybe it's not planned yet.
I don't know yet.
I think I'm still at the stage of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, and that keeps re-upping as things change and morph and all that fun stuff.
So that's actually a very good survey, Danielle, because if you go to the next, or excuse me, a segue, if you go to our next slide, it is all about tracking the effectiveness of RA efforts in the library. So this is something we did ask about. This was something I worked in public libraries for 12 years, and this is something we always struggled with because I think librarians are very good at capturing quantitative information about, the number of questions asked, the number of books checked out, but maybe not the effectiveness of what we're doing. So the survey did show that 26% of respondents do not track the effectiveness of their Readers Advisory. And so I throw it out to the panel and ask, do you all measure the effectiveness of your RA services? If you do, is there anything you wish you tracked that you don't? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Michelle, go first.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, first of all, is the number of people there and like the number of requests, like, physical hard numbers, like the circulation on the any online displays or virtual RA that we've done, or like that. And then maybe the feedback is the last one, but of course there's kind of a gap of understanding sometimes what people mean clearly or getting the feedback helpfully in a more helpful form, but mostly it's just the numbers, something kind of more concrete to look at.
Yeah, I think a lot of what gets tracked are those numbers, because in general, as libraries and librarians, we don't ask people what we did with them or worked with them, how that affected their lives, right? We don't look as much for the outcome measures as we do for the output measures. And it's hard to do that because, with Readers Advisory, especially with asynchronous Readers Advisory, where you're talking about displays or things in your catalog, we may not ever have a contact with those users who are interacting with us, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very hard for us to say, how did that change somebody? But I think it really is important to track it in some way, even if it's just, as Michelle said, tracking the numbers of people who are asking the questions, the numbers of clicks into the catalog, mm-hmm. things like that, for two reasons. One of which is to inform future RA services, right? So if we know something works or something doesn't work, but then also as an advocacy tool, how do we, if we don't know what we're doing or how people are using our RA services, it's very difficult for us to advocate for those as valuable services for the library. Mm-hmm. So thinking about things about, tracking clicks into your catalog from asynchronous Readers Advisory services, if you're using linked data to create carousels, if you're using tools like NoveList Select to pull content into your catalog, you got to go back and look at those numbers. We're really good at starting stuff sometimes, but not so good at going back and evaluating stuff as librarians. Use catalog data. We don't think about sometimes of the data, the rich data that we can maybe pull out of our catalog with a little bit of help from IT folks sometimes. But if you are asking your users for their age or their gender or other questions like that, when you're getting library cards in their hands, you can then use that to correlate against circulation data for different parts of the collection. So mm-hmm. you can find out that women are checking out more of this, or people in this age bracket are checking out more of that. Helps you target your RA services better to those groups, perhaps. So just think, little things like that. Tracking how much goes off your physical displays. I mean, that's an easy one, but not everybody's doing it. So lots of options, but I think it's a really important piece that I've always felt we're not catching really well in the Readers Advisory community.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. Anyone else have anything they want to share about how they track Readers Advisory interactions or services in your library? There were some mentions in chat of how different people do it as well. All right, so the next slide is going to show you a little bit more information of how libraries do track the effectiveness of their Readers Advisory for those people that answered that they do. So over half do track feedback from readers. And so I would imagine that that would be something like if they do form-based Readers Advisory, they're getting feedback. I saw Dodie put in chat that they have a scale that they ask readers to select of how likely they are to read the books that they suggest to them. So that's one way. About half track the number of Readers Advisory requests. So that's a very easy way. You know, it's just sheer numbers, how many people have asked Readers Advisory questions. And then during the pandemic, we did see a lot of online Readers Advisory through social media. And so nearly 40%, 38% tracked by followers and engagement. And then again, there were 26% that just don't track at all. And 28% track the promoted books circulation. So that's what Barry just mentioned. That's an easy way to track Readers Advisory for things that are on display or that you've put in somehow in a virtual display on your catalog. All right, so switching gears a bit, somebody asked in chat about RA training. So let's talk a little bit about that. One of the things we saw in the survey was that many respondents commented in the free form section. We had a question about what would help them feel more confident in providing Readers Advisory in the library. And many respondents commented that having more training would really help and it would increase their confidence. So we have another poll for you. And we are curious if you offer Readers Advisory training in your library. So we'll give everybody a few minutes to answer that. Excuse me. Okay, we'll give that about 10 more seconds and then we'll close out this poll and we'll share the results here. So Nora just said that they show NoveList to new employees. We love hearing that. Those of us who work at NoveList are always happy to hear that you show off the database to new employees. All right, let's go ahead and close out the poll. We'll share the results. Okay, so half of the people here attending, over half, 54%, said that you do not offer RA training for staff at your library, but 17% said you're working on it, so that's great. And then almost 30% said yes. So some of our panelists have some varying answers to this one. Jessica, why don't you go first? You had a response about training at your library and what it looks like.
Sure. I am the person who has training at our library. It's something that took a long time to get buy-in and get developed, and but we sort of formalized a training program in 2013. In 2015, we were added into the new hire rotation. So there is actually a new hire set of classes that everybody goes through depending on their level, the job that they're coming into. And then we also, so we're doing sort of a basic RA 101 type class, some database training. We always have kind of, I know, depending on where we feel the needs are, we have programs that we put on throughout the year for staff that is open to anybody. But the actual training is required for library assistants, librarians, and branch heads. But, and then there's a set of exercises that everybody has to go through within their first year, and then follow up, that's something that everybody has to do every year too. So it's pared down from where we started. We started kind of too big for everybody to be happy, but it's something where we're hoping we're getting the message across that it's important, and that there are lots of more opportunities and places to find training too outside of what we do.
So I'm curious, Jessica, when you say it was too big, was that too much information, too much time spent on it?
We
What
wanted
about
to
it?
spend more time on it, and we wanted to give them even more, but it became one of those time versus time out of branch, or
Right.
that sort of thing. So
about how much time do you devote to it now for those new staff who are all getting
the
trained?
very new staff are getting only like an hour with me or one of the Readers Advisory Committee
Okay.
in their second week of training, but they also get time spent on the databases with I think one of our other staff people, and then I spend a little time on we also do a little bit with NoveList and other resources that we kind of keep at someplace so everybody knows they can find more resources in addition to NoveList. And we are then, everybody's required to attend 2 workshops a year of some kind. So, and it's pretty open as long as they're a good Readers Advisory program.
So that's specific to Readers Advisory workshops a year,
Yes.
not just any to continuing education. And how big is your library
Actually,
system?
1 a year. Sorry,
That's good.
two for the beginners, 1 a year for everybody else,
Okay.
I think.
And how many staff are in your library system? Sorry. You don't have to.
Not sure. Thais, do you know 200?
Okay.
I saw my boss on here.
200.
Yep, about 200.
There we go. It's helpful to have colleagues in the chat when you're stumped.
Thank you.
All right, Michelle, you have an answer to this question as well, or these questions as well.
Yeah, we don't have any RA training. And so obviously we kind of like, obviously as collection development, it's just the 2 librarians. And like, we have to offer information to the other like branch librarians about like the genres or particular like subgenre or new titles. But the RA experience is on a kind of a individual basis. And so mostly we just like kind of have flyers and information like on a shared database or SharePoint that we offer it. But obviously Jessica, this is obviously a process of learning and building up to it, like Jessica mentioned. Yeah.
So for hi, I'm Carolina, and I work at the Denver Public Library. So we have the personalized reading list request, so customers can request personalized reading list. And for new respondents, there is like procedures, how much information to include on those responses. So it looks cohesive. It doesn't matter who responds. So that type of training, and also internal training as far as like EDI in Readers Advisory to make sure like a certain percentage of recommendations are by BIPOC authors. So that's like internal, but when it comes to like external training, I feel like for me, I do, I'm a respondent and I do like the Spanish responses, but I find trainings like, I find trainings online, and I also use NoveList, but for me, it's slightly different. I use NoveList as I want it to be like one-stop shop, but for me, it's like, that's the initial step I take, and then I have to look for additional web pages or other resources that maybe other librarians have put together, or publishing houses where I can go and find, and not necessarily that type of training, but just to find additional resources so then I incorporate in my response. So I feel like I do like take do those trainings are available, but then sometimes I find them that it's missing that piece. Like if you were responding in another language, like I can't get that from those types of trainings. So I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience. All right, so according to our survey on the next slide, you'll see that when we asked about training, or when we asked about providing readers advisory, here were the three main problems that people identified as far as obstacles to providing readers advisory. And the big one was working with unfamiliar genres and authors. I think this is something that every librarian has had to deal with, and there's a sense of you kind of freeze in the moment and think, I don't know how to answer this because I'm not familiar with that author. I'm not familiar with the genre. I also think sometimes age level. I was an adult services librarian for my time in libraries. When I would get a children's question, sometimes I would panic a little bit and think, oh, I don't know. So no surprise there, about 44% of people said that was the main problem in providing readers advisory. And then the next two, the time to give thoughtful suggestions and keeping up with new titles, were both tied at 18% as main problems when providing readers advisory. And then on the next slide, I think this is especially important when we think about who in the library needs to feel comfortable providing RA services. The vast majority of libraries, 82%, said all staff provide readers advisory services in their library. So Jessica's example of all new staff members get this training, it's important to keep that sort of thing in mind, because while some libraries do have a dedicated readers advisory staff or a readers advisory person, the people coming into the library don't necessarily know that. So they're going to ask anybody about readers advisory. They're going to ask for book suggestions from anybody they see. So it is important when you're thinking about readers advisory training in your library to consider all staff in that. And then one more slide about readers advisory training. This is just a breakdown of how people are getting that training. Free training took the top spot with 83%. That would include things like webcasts or things like this would be considered readers advisory education. And then nearly, or just over half were trained by their library, or about 42% were trained by the state. And then you can see only 30% had a dedicated readers advisory course in their MLS program. And then 5% of respondents had no readers advisory training whatsoever. All right, so next we're going to talk about readers advisory in other formats. We have another poll for you here. And we're curious to know if your library offers advisory in formats other than books. So again, it should pop up right on your screen and you can answer here. We'll give it a minute.
While we're waiting, I just want to make sure that Barry hears the shout out that he got in chat. Somebody said that your training was inspirational. So kudos.
Yay.
Thank you. Thanks,
Barry's
Amy.
awesome.
Thank you, Amy.
Okay, we'll give it about 10 more seconds for people to answer and then we'll close out. All right, let's go ahead and we'll close that out. We'll share the results. All right, so 73% do audiobook RA, and then 58 do movies, which is awesome. So only 6% do video game RA and 7% do podcasts. So if you'll go to the next slide. Amy, I think you have some information about providing RA in other formats than just books.
Yeah, I think I have the personal benefit of being a big nerd, and I also did I did my undergrad degree in film history and criticism. So I watch a lot of movies and TV. I play a lot of video games and also board games. So when I went into public libraries, I was really surprised that I could still talk about those things with people. At my previous position, I did collection development for our video game collection. So it made it really easy to learn about games that might be out of my wheelhouse by doing research, seeing what we should purchase and what different systems were coming up, etc. At my current library, we have a few video games, but we have a large board game and RPG book collection. So that's been really fun to do readers advisory for. We have board games for like all ages up to like adults that are like a 6-hour board game. And it helps that myself and my manager are big board game nerds. And so he's created really helpful cards that have not only the age ranges for games, but also a synopsis of what it's like. So even those who aren't into board games can go through that. And it also helps that I play a lot of RPGs. So as people are checking out those Dungeons and Dragons books, I can not only promote maybe programs that connect with that, but also some books that could connect with that as well, because a lot of these RPG systems have their own books as well that all ages might appreciate.
So that was actually my next question, was when you're doing this sort of advisory, is it cross format? You know, you're recommending books for games, or is it just games to games? But you just answered my question. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I try. But sometimes, especially with the teens, they kind of want to get that D&D book and leave immediately, or just talk about their character or something like that. So it's, you kind of have to read the room sometimes.
Yeah. All right, so we do have one slide that shows the results when we ask this question. It's very similar to how the results in our participant poll just went. So no surprises there, I don't think. All right. Next up, we're going to talk about providing readers advisory in other languages. So Carolina, you mentioned this, that you do Spanish readers advisory. So we have a poll for everybody to answer if you offer readers advisory language in languages other than English. So we'll go ahead and launch that. And this one, because it's fewer possible answers than some of our other ones, we'll give it a shorter amount of time. We'll go ahead and close this out here in just a few seconds. All right, so 67% said no and 20% said I'm not sure. So that's kind of interesting. Carolina, can you talk a little bit about your experience providing? I know you did reference some of it in the training question that we had, but will you talk a little bit about what the challenges are?
Yeah, so I mean, across the library system, I mean, the survey, I mean, I agree with the survey that, you know, most of the people that work at library system provide a percentage of readers advisory, whether in person, virtually, or both. And depending if that person speaks another language, you will provide that in another language. We do have the, like I mentioned earlier, like in our library system, the personalized reading list request, so customers can request items using that form. And how we have it set up is just people will request items, and then there's an option there to request those items in Spanish. And so if an adult requests those in Spanish, then it comes to me, and then I will answer that request. Also, it's divided in like 3 sections, I guess. So we'll have like teens respondents, children, and then adult. And then for the Spanish is teen and children, and then adults. And I respond to both. There is a lot of challenges. So I have my notes with my challenges that we face. But for the children's, at the moment, it's another colleague and myself responding to the children's request in Spanish. And I feel like we have a pretty good amount of children's material in our library system. And the challenge is when customers requesting a certain genre, and then we tend to go outside of the genre that they're actually requesting. And we just try to find the titles that we can match as closely as possible. And then for the adult, our collection is less So Spanish adult material is less than our children material. And there, even though there's more colleagues responding to this request, we have the same where like we tend to go outside the genre of if the customer that is the customer's requesting a certain genre, and we tend to go outside more than if we were to respond in English. We would like stick with that, but we tend to go outside more. And then how I mentioned before, like we do try to find like, I mean, like we don't know every single title either. So sometimes a customer will request a title like, oh, I want to read like something similar to this title that I really love. And then if you're not familiar with it, and then there's only a couple of colleagues like responding, you know, you do your searches, you use the tools available to you, and then you try to do the best you can. But I find it sometimes that you didn't provide like the best possible list that you could have. And then another thing is with the adult material, because it's limited or there's less, we have a, we always try to include non-translated materials first in our responses, but sometimes we just go to translations. And then, you know, like translations don't always are by BIPOC authors. So that's like our challenge as well. So yes, so the challenges.
Yes, it sounds like a lot of challenges, but sounds like you're meeting the challenge pretty well and being able to provide services for your Spanish speaking patrons.
Yes, we're
that's
trying.
Yeah.
One more challenge I have. When it comes to like children's material, we have a, I'll come back to me and then I'll share that.
Okay. Okay. That's okay. All right. So we'll go ahead. We're going to move on and talk about diversity guidelines. That's something else we asked about. And we want to ask all of you if you have diversity guidelines specifically for your RA services in your library. Some libraries I know have for collection development, but I'm curious if you have formal diversity guidelines at your library. And we'll just give this a few seconds. Well, actually, why don't we let people answer while we let our panelists talk, because I'm being very aware of how much time we have left and I want to leave a little bit of time for questions as well. So Barry, you want to talk a little bit about your library having diversity guidelines?
Sure. So we're sort of in the beginning process, I guess, of thinking about diversity, but we felt that the first thing we needed to do was to figure out a way to assess the collection itself. So we actually implemented a diversity audit last fall, sort of a good pandemic project for staff, looking at the young adult collection, because it was a small, relatively speaking, small collection that was easily handleable. And so we did that audit, you know, started looking then at the results against the community portrait that you get from the Census Bureau, because that's the, you know, one way to start to look at the diversity of your community. And I think as you start to look at diversity audits and getting diversity information about your collection, looking at your collection, there's a couple of things you need to think about. Is how are you going to use that information to inform your purchasing, your reading, your repurchasing of titles? And then also, how are you going to use the information you collect to think about promoting diverse collections? So whether that's as you're developing displays, whether that is as you're developing finding aids, and also think about that. Don't forget to include your technical services people here, to get with them as you're thinking about how you're making your diverse titles accessible in your catalog so that people can find things, because your technical services folks really have a lot to inform this question. And I think one of the challenges we realized, though, was also the search for diversity in your collection is driven partly by what's available. So if the publishing industry isn't out there publishing diverse materials for all ages, we're going to have a hard time putting diverse things in our library. So we need to be advocates, not just within our library for diverse collections. We need to advocate with the publishing industry too. But it's a really exciting time for us, and we're really interested. We're in the middle right now of doing the diversity audit for our entire adult fiction collection. So hopefully we'll have the results for that soon.
I would imagine that's quite the undertaking. All right, so let's go ahead and share the poll results and then go on to the next slide, if you will. So on the next slide, you'll see that 13% of libraries said that they had, oh, sorry, I lost the poll results, but their library does not, only 13%, excuse me, said their library has formal diversity guidelines, which is pretty close to what we have here, 11%. However, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that 66% of the respondents say they do it on their own. So people are thinking about this, it might just not be formalized yet. And then Jessica and Michelle, I think you both also had some experience with diversity guidelines at your library.
Let me go first. Sorry.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. So actually building on all the things Barry just said, we started, you know, as we were learning more about diversity audits, we were really looking at a lot of those different areas. We're also kind of looking at it from the viewpoint of I'm in collection development, but I don't handle weeding for our system, so for our 14 branch system. So everybody has to be kind of involved and up on what's going on and what we're planning to do. So we kind of started with rethinking and rewording our weeding guidelines. We took small bite chunks of looking at what we were, you know, just after the fact snapshots of a cart or the carts we were doing when we're ordering for the collection and getting an idea of where we were in terms of what we were getting in carts from our vendors, what we were adding from different places that satisfied kind of that were actually good diverse materials to add to the collection. But we've kind of gone into, we're now a year and a half into our current strategic plan, and we wrote it in. One of the objectives was develop cattle as a place of inclusion, diversity, and social equity. And the goals attached to that included a survey that we are doing with patrons annually to see whether they think the collection actually reflects that, the diversity and accessibility needs of our community. But the sort of strategies that we have under that include the diversity audit, but it's an audit of not just the collections, but how we're doing our recommendations, what we're doing with book discussions, what we're doing with story times. And by doing it this way, we're really making all of the staff mindful of where the direction we want to go. And, you know, there's hurdles and some things are going really well, but it's one of those things where we're growing into it, and I feel like we're going in the right direction. We're still kind of, it's that audit for a large collection isn't easy or anything that you can do in one fell swoop, regardless of which service you work with. It's still, or if you're doing it by hand, which mostly we're doing right now. But it is something that I think we thought was very important, and there goes the lawnmower. Excuse me.
No problem. The joys of being at home. All right. So I apologize, Michelle, because I think we're going to go ahead and move on since we don't have much time quite left. So I just wanted to point out that 48% of the libraries that we surveyed either have conducted or are planning to conduct a diversity audit of their collection. It broke out to about 20% have said they already have, 28% they have plans to. So then our last thing that I wanted to touch on was if there was anything else about the survey results that struck our panelists as interesting or that you've seen reflected in your own experiences. And why don't Carolina, did you have anything that you wanted to share? I know you said circle back, so I want to make sure to give you an opportunity to add anything you didn't have a chance to add.
Yes, I do have other challenge that I face. And thank you, Barry, for reminding me. So it's actually like promotion because we're only 2 respondents that, reply to the children's request. And so I want to promote so much. But then if I promote, then, all of that work is going to come to only 2 people for the entire library system. And then I have other duties. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to share. And then the results that I found, which was interesting, like the survey, like one of the question is your biggest challenge, and for me is collection availability. And I know that's only 8% on the survey, like it's at the bottom, but for me, like that's my highest.
Thank you. Michelle, I think you also had something that you wanted to say interesting about the survey.
Yes, I was interested in the advisory and other formats, especially for podcasts and video games, especially podcasts, because there's such a wide variety of keeping up. And once again, it's about having kind of trying to know what your staff or what specialty they have to keep that open. But I was something interesting. I just didn't know what other people thought of that.
Well, and one interesting thing about podcasts is that so many of them are making the leap to print media too. Like, I'm a big fan of the Adventure Zone, which started as a podcast, as like a D&D podcast, and now they're adapting those into graphic novels. Or I saw like Bubble is one, or now they're turning into TV shows. So there's so many, they jump, right? And it's really interesting to see ways that we can promote it.
Thanks. Anybody else? So I'm looking at the time, we're at 2:56 on the East Coast here. And so we had lots of really, really, really fantastic questions that came in during the chat and through the Q&A in Zoom. So we won't have a chance to get to all of those, but I'm going to go ahead and suggest that we will rope our panelists into doing a blog post for us, answering some of these questions after the fact. We'll share that to answer some of the questions that came in. And some people in chat have asked if the chat transcript will be shared as well, because lots of good information was going back and forth there. We will be sharing the chat transcripts, having a hard time saying that today, after we're all done, along with the recording. So thank you so much for joining us today. This was so full of wonderful information. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your experiences and your thoughts about the survey. Thank you for our participants for joining us and for sharing in chat what you have seen in RA services and what you are doing in your libraries. We do have a survey at the end of this that will pop up. So please take the survey, tell us what you thought about this webinar, what you'd like to see moving forward. And like, as I said, we will send a link to the recording along with the chat transcript in a couple of days. And if you have any questions or feedback, there is an email address on your screen. Please reach out to us. We always love hearing from everybody. We love getting your feedback specifically about NoveList, but just in general about Readers Advisory. We love hearing about what you're doing. So if you do have any questions or comments, let us know. And thank you. Good luck to all of you as we go off into this Delta variant COVID world. And I know you're all facing a lot of challenges in libraries. So thank you for doing that hard work. And thank you for joining us today. And again, thank you for your engagement. We loved seeing those questions come in and you all sharing your experiences.